They're back and stuff.
Yes. How are you? The perfect time.
It's always cold. How was your number for you?
I was only there for 2 years.
So we need one now, and then we have 2 more resources.
Are you going to the left again?
Yes.
Okay.
Go to the left. On my home. Why would they do it there?
Yes,
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, thank you for joining us and welcome to Brookings. My name is Brahima Koulibaly. I'm the Vice President of the Global Economy and Development Program, the program that houses our Africa program. And it really gives me great pleasure to open this important conversation on Africa's vast reserve of critical minerals and their potential to actually strengthen U.S. Africa relations. Critical minerals have quickly become one of the defining issues of our time, and for good reasons. They are essential for clean energy, for digital technologies, and industries that will shape the global economy in the decades ahead. For Africa, this is more than just supplying global markets. It's about whether the continent can translate this vast resource of wealth into lasting economic development and shared prosperity. If managed well, critical mineral can indeed serve as a springboard for Africa's development, accelerating industrialization, creating jobs for the growing population, and enhancing the continent's role in the global economy. If mismanaged, however, they risk reinforcing old patterns of dependency and missed opportunities. So the stakes could not be higher. At the same time, the U.S. is in need to diversify its partners in the critical minerals sector. So this is really an ideal opportunity for the two regions to work together. So in traditional Brookings approach, the new report we're launching today is grounded in rigorous research and extensive consultations with leaders in government, business, civil society, and multilateral institutions. It offers a roadmap of how United States and Africa can work together to mobilize private finance, modernize the mining sector, and build a supply chain that delivers mutual benefits. We are especially grateful to have the participation of Congresswoman Sheila Sherfilis McCormick. For those looking around for her, she's not here just yet, but we were told she's only just a few minutes away. Today, as you know, she's delayed because she had to save the government, which is being threatened to being shut down. But in her fashion of really tireless champion of this deepening U.S. Africa relations and strengthening partnerships that promote shared prosperity and opportunity on both sides, she really didn't want to miss this. So we thank her again for her leadership and commitment to advancing the mutually beneficial relations. So with that, let me turn it over to Pierre Ngunke, who is the Senior Fellow and Director of the Africa Program. Please join me to welcome him.
Thank you very much, Cole. And thank you to our esteemed guests and to our audience joining in person here today or online from Africa and around the world. For over 17 years, AGI has been a leading voice on Africa policy research in the United States. When established in 2008, it was the first Africa program here in Washington, D.C. AGI's work has always emphasized the tremendous opportunity and potential of African countries with trade, investment, technology, and structural transformation as key areas of this research. Today's discussion cuts across each of these key areas. Critical minerals are an increasingly important component of the world economy. African countries' supply of these minerals has the potential to substantially shape their development trajectories if policies, infrastructure, and investment strategies are adequately developed. Building on quality research and multiple roundtable discussions with key stakeholders in the public and private sectors, the report that we are launching today, Leveraging U.S. Africa Critical Mineral Opportunities, outlines how the United States and African countries can successfully develop and integrate a mutually beneficial relationship around critical minerals. Seizing this opportunity will create jobs and infrastructure at every stage, from extraction and processing to manufacturing and distribution. It promises added value to African economies and energy and technology security in the U.S. Today, we are honored to welcome the Honorable Congresswoman Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick, who has long been a proponent of a strong U.S.-Africa relationship. Congresswoman Cherfilus-McCormick is the ranking member of the Subcommittee on the Middle East and North Africa. She's the member of the Subcommittee in Africa, and she's also the chair of the Africa's Global Women's Issues on Task Force. As we find it in this report, U.S. engagement on Africa's critical minerals requires a whole-of-government approach, and we welcome the Honorable Congresswoman's perspective on the role of Congress in this. I am also happy to introduce Professor Landry Signé, who's AGI Senior Fellow and one of the report's co-author, who will chair the discussion with the Congresswoman and also the panel that will follow. Professor Signé is the editor-in-chief of Foresight Africa 2025. He's the host of our Brookings Foresight Africa podcast, and he's also co-chair of the World Economic Forum Regional Action Group for Africa. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I look forward to hearing your insight during this very important discussion in our audience Q&A, which you can submit online to events@brookings.edu or on X Twitter by using hashtag US Africa Critical Minerals. I am grateful to our scholars, Dr. Ede Ijas-Vasquez and also Dr. Vera Songwe, for their work on this report and for the entire team at Brookings for their support. I also thank Mr. Tarek Ben Youssef, who's the Chargé d'Affaires AI at the African Union Mission to the US. I now invite Mr. Ben Youssef on stage.
Hello, everyone. No, I don't see the energy here. Hello, everyone. Hello. Fantastic. I love this. So first of all, thank you so much, Vice President Coulibaly, Professor and Director Gimke, for the wonderful opening remarks. So Congresswoman is on her way. She'll be there in about a minute or two, so we'll wait perhaps for about a couple of minutes. And then you will have the pleasure to hear from her words of wisdom. So is everyone doing well today? Yes. I love this. So, as she is on her way, who has traveled in more than 5 African countries here? Oh, wow, about half of the audience. And who know almost everything about critical minerals in Africa? Ede, Vera, you are the key leading author, so you should be knowing everything. And also, of course, chargé d'affaires Tarek. So let me go to welcome Congresswoman Sheila Sheffield-McCormick, and then we'll be with you in about a couple of minutes.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
I
Amazing. So please give another very warm welcome to Congresswoman Sheila Theophilus McCormick. I love this. I love this. Congresswoman, we are incredibly grateful that you are making time today to join us despite your key role in saving the government. So we really want to express our deep gratitude. You were already introduced, but I just want to share again a few things about your real incredible leadership. Of course, you were elected for the third time as a congresswoman representing Florida's 20th congressional district. And you have served on many distinguished committees, being the top Democrat, for example, on the subcommittee on the Middle East and North Africa, among others. And more importantly, I know you for your leadership in building a better U.S. Africa relations, whether in terms of the African Continental Free Trade Area, critical minerals, but also the diaspora. If I read your entire bio, we'll be here in a week. So I just want to share this, to take this opportunity to express again our deep gratitude on behalf of AGI, on behalf of Global, on behalf of the Brookings institution, and for you joining us today despite the many moving parts evolving about the future of the U.S. government.
Well, thank you so much for all those nice words. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Brookings Institute. I think this is my second time being here, so this feels like family. It's such an honor to be here and see the experts in the front row who do all the hard work, and yourself. And I feel humbled to be here in this situation. And I thank you guys, because we're running a little late. We're facing a government shutdown. And my constituents, businesses, everybody's frantic. And we're here while they're frantic in the district. So trying to balance the two is difficult, but I said I wouldn't miss this for the world. What Brookings Institute has been doing continuously, and as we move forward, is being the mind of what goes on in Africa and us crafting policy. So thank you so much, Brookings Institute. And as far as what's going on in Africa, we're seeing from, last time we were here, we had different administration. Now we have shifted to a new administration, but we all still have the same purpose. And so now we've been navigating, how do we still prioritize Africa? How do we have this administration that has a different mindset to see that it is important to navigate and prioritize Africa? And I think that's been the biggest challenge for some of us. And now we've been in this administration for 9 months, has it been? Maybe 9 or 10 months. And I think we're starting to get the rhythm. We're starting to understand what the priorities are. And so I think we are at an exciting moment where we can start talking about what Africa and Africans have been wanting to talk about, being respected as a trade partner, being seen as not just a handout, but an economic partner and engine that would lead the entire world. And we do have opportunities. So when people talk about where we are, I said, let's look at the bright side. This gives us an opportunity to talk about what we can do. Now, one of the things that we faced in having this conversation with the administration is the transparency, I believe, that's necessary, that despite what administration is present, that we as members of Congress can keep the momentum going. You know, what are the policies being put in place that we can strengthen as members of Congress, that we can actually continue going forward? Because I think one of the things I've seen in my brief time in Congress, I've been there for 4 years, is that it seems like with the new administration, you sometimes feel like you're starting all over again. And if we want to make sure that we're actually building upon the policies, the relationships, the academic work that we've done, we have to actually put in the institutional knowledge, like a mechanism, so we can continue that knowledge, and also continue the mentorship of leaders, present and future leaders that are in different countries, but also in the United States. And so that's something that we're trying to build also. And I'll pass it over to you. I can talk forever because, you know, I'm excited about this.
We love this. That is fantastic, Congresswoman. And as we have seen from your impressive background, you have been champion supporting U.S. Africa engagement. And for you, what are the benefits of a strong U.S. Africa relations from the American interest perspective?
Well, two things. Energy security is number one. I think we have to prioritize energy security, especially right now, as we see the world moving towards AI in every avenue. That is going to take energy to power the AI facilities, but we're also going to need it when it comes to national security. And I say that because I've been in several conferences, and in the conferences, they always talk about energy security. They always talk about China, like that seems to be the word, China's influence. And I always go back to, well, what are we doing to make sure that we're better partners than the Chinese? What are we actually doing to make sure that, you know, we're actually coming to the table and saying, hey, we're going to invest not just in providing aid, but we have a structure here that will allow you to grow. And to be quite honest with you, after coming back from New York and talking to the UN, different members and dignitaries at the UN General Assembly, there's one thing that I realized, and because we're family now, I will tell you honestly. You know, we have these conversations, and some people are very partisan. You know, I don't like this administration, I like this administration, I prefer this. And they come into the room and they talk to leaders like, yeah, you know, you don't like this person who's there now because they're a tyrant. The truth is, democracy in different countries are different. You know, so we're trying to come in and say, don't you want this version of democracy in your country? Isn't that what you want? And the leader is looking like, I don't care about politics in America. I don't. What I care about is that we are now actually taking seriously to allow my country to have an economic foundation that allows us to create businesses, that allows us to have jobs, that allows us to now invest in mechanisms where you do have a healthcare system that's not a handout.
Absolutely.
And so that has been, I think, the biggest eye-opening thing for a lot of my colleagues and myself, that we do have to extract politics, policies that are surrounded around different ideologies and get to what they want. We had a really great person, he does a lot of energy security, and what he talked about and told me his biggest mistake when he went to Africa and did business in Africa is that he came in with a bag full of things that I think you need. This is what you need, and I think you need it. And all the leaders said, no, we don't want anything you're selling. We don't want it, because it wasn't what they needed. And right now, we have a perspective where we're looking at, hey, from an economic perspective, what do you need and what can I give you? So that conversation when it comes to minerals, because of the influence of China and because of the need for energy security, puts Africa in a prime position for us now to elevate the importance of Africa today and in the future, but also in the past. Because the truth is, if we had prioritized our relationship with Africa economically, China wouldn't have had its foothold in Africa as it does now.
Fantastic, Congresswoman. I really like how you emphasize the importance of decoupling politics and policy to really unlock trade and investment. African countries, numerous African countries have critical minerals that both the U.S. and other countries, you mentioned China, for example, are looking forward to engage in partnerships. So, from your perspective, what is the Congress take on shaping U.S. Africa relations in terms of critical minerals?
I think we have to understand what's actually going on in the present state. In the present state, the administration has been leading those negotiations. And so the biggest example I can give you is when it comes to the DRC. In the DRC, they've been leading those negotiations. We actually met with the president of the DRC. And one of the things we talked about is more transparency. Having the conversation also with Rwanda and more transparency. And one of the things that we were stressing is, in order for this agreement to be successful long term, we need to understand what the terms are so we can create the scaffolding underneath as far as policies that are through Congress to make sure that you can survive any administration. So that's the first half. I think the second half, too, is being able to elevate each country and what they can do as far as providing minerals. We also met with the president of Botswana, and he talked about what he was doing actually for his minerals and to bring it to the forefront. And it all comes down to job creation and creating that economy. And so as we're talking to them about what policies they want to see, it's interesting, and this is where I even had to take a step back. I feel like they're more open to expressing now, well, I don't want to go back to this program that just gives aid. We don't want that. But let's sit down and write something about jobs. How about we have the youngest people who can help, work with the United States? Could you bring your businesses to us so we can process minerals in our country? That's a huge conversation. I see more of a public-private partnership and not just one that includes NGOs. And I believe there's a space for every single person, and every place actually fills a pothole.
Fabulous. And you mentioned it, the role of the private sector. Would you mind elaborating a little bit more on the role of the private sector as compared to government?
I think a lot of times, the way I've been looking at it, and this is just because we're ripe off of the UN General Assembly, is I go back to what I was told pretty much about understanding is what they need. And so when we talk about in context of what the role is, we're looking more so to engage private companies, right? What is it you need to be successful to make sure that these countries can get there? One of the things that I hear over and over now that I don't think Congress was thinking before, it really comes back to financing. Are the financing mechanisms present? How can we leverage finance mechanisms and de-risk the economies to make sure that companies will come in and develop these countries? That's why we recently passed an amendment with the CR, which no one thought we were going to be able to do because it's a Republican Congress. But there are things that we do agree on, and one of them was when it came to remittances. Actually developing a program to invest the remittances so we can see returns and so businesses can have an opportunity to actually derive or derivatives from the remittances that go to Africa. I think the numbers could have been anywhere between like $12 billion in remittances that are now being taxed. So looking for opportunities like that for policy where we can meet the need. So we will need more private industries to tell us how we can actually make this a reality.
I couldn't agree more, and especially as in many places, when we look and we aggregate the number, we even have some who will highlight more than $100 billion. So it's a huge investment. And I connect this with the competition between the US and other global power in investing in African critical minerals. And for you, what is the unique advantage that the U.S. offers to African countries?
I think the uniqueness of the United States, not just our policies and our beliefs and hope, but also the diaspora. The diaspora has the cultural competency and the desire and the kinsmanship, right? Because I know every time we go to Africa, they always welcome us as cousins and family. And so there's a bond between people who have a common ancestry that cannot be broken. And there's a willingness to learn and to give back purely from a motivation of, this, if you succeed, I succeed. There's a dignity in that. And so that's why we've been looking to leverage the diaspora. And there's good news in everything, and I always want to point out that good news. What we've been able to do also is we've been going around in the district and through South Florida, and we'll talk about doing business in Africa. And the administration has sent different administrators and heads of companies where they do matching. So if you have your business and you want to do business in Africa, there are also different entities that will help match you so you can do business. They also will talk about how can you find that financial funding. Now, these are opportunities that I think I've never seen before to this magnitude with the last administration. So in this administration that's more business focused, let's cleave onto that positive point, and anything negative, let's try to undo it. So I think that's another avenue that I've seen that has been working.
I really love, Congresswoman, how you always provide very pragmatic ways of engaging, not just with Africa, but even here in the US. And related to this, what potential do you see for Africa's diaspora to support development of the African continent for a stronger US-Africa relations?
I think we have a real big opportunity right now because there's a lot of experts out there who are looking for other opportunities. Unfortunately, we've been fighting all the layoffs that we saw with the State Department, but there's some people who I've spoken to who say they don't want to go back and they would love to engage on a different level still in the continent. So until we can restore or bring, make sure the jobs are still present, I fight every day to make sure we have other avenues so people can still use their talent, so they can kind of maybe even reimagine their careers. Maybe this is the opportunity where we can have real relationships with Africa because we have Africa specialists who I feel have been disregarded who can actually link. So let's help link them there. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity for everyone. And as a member of Congress, it is our responsibility to craft those opportunity pipelines with the support of private industry, with the support of the diplomatic corps. This is a caveat. I think in this moment, we do need to be putting more money into the diplomatic corps and strengthening our soft power, our diplomatic footprint, so we can make sure we're leveraging everybody for those relationships. And I say that sincerely because I think sometimes we fantasize of these projects and doing business, but we can't do it without the diplomatic corps. We can't do it without experts guiding. So we have to be able to fund and sustain both areas.
Amazing. And we have representative of the diplomatic corps who will speak also later, like for example, Chargé d'Affaires Tarek Ben Youssef. Yeah. So for people who listen, for the audience of our podcast, Foresight Africa podcast, you know that I like to finish interviews with a couple of questions. One of them is, Congresswoman, what piece of advice will you give to either U.S., global or African policy makers to reach a better outcome? And perhaps before even answering the question, we will want on a more personal note to understand, why are you so passionate about Africa?
Well, I think my passion with Africa just stems from, my parents are Haitian, and as Haitian people, we always have this, we're African, we know where we come from, we understand the struggle, we understand the fight, and Haiti's also a Francophone country, and so when I travel abroad and I'm in Francophone countries, we speak the same language. When we went to Cote d'Ivoire, we met with we met with people in Cote d'Ivoire. We also met with the president of the DRC. I was like, oh, your French is just like mine. We have the same dialect. Now, French is not the same everywhere. I want to tell you that. It's not. Because sometimes when I hear some people speaking French, I'm like, oh, I can't understand it. But I feel at home when I come in, you know, and you hear the same French dialect. You're speaking back, and it feels like home. And I also have the pride of home, which is not just being of Haitian descent, not just being American, but also seeing our homeland, the motherland. You want to see it succeed. And I think that's secretly within every Black American in the United States. We would like to feel and see Africa respected. It is part of our dignity, too, to see Africa and Africans respected, because now we feel seen and respected. So I think that's where that comes from. And the advice I would give everybody in this moment, I think a lot, and I can't pretend that I know what dignitaries and what people in this space see and feel every day, because I'm not in it. In my world, it is war every day. Every day we're fighting in Congress. Every day it's political. And so what I advise all of us, and what I would advise to you is, you know, in this moment, let's take advantage of the good things that would help us get to our end. And let's also pay attention to the things that are being depleted and start rebuilding them underneath. Because there will be a point where this will shift. That's the beautiful thing about this country. And I can notice it because in Haiti we had a dictatorship. My parents talk about this all the time. At least there's an end date. You know, at this point, this policy will end, something will shift. When you have a dictator, you don't know if he even dies, his brother, his cousin. You don't know what's happening. We might be stuck here forever. But that's the beauty of this country. And right now, there are some good things, and that's why I wanted to point them out. Let's exacerbate the good parts. Let's make them the maximize what we need. And the stuff that needs to be rebuilt, let's not forget about them. Let's talk about how we're going to rebuild them, how we're going to make them even better. Let's be innovative and imaginative right now and create the world that we all believed in and that we all hope to. Because at the truth, in the heart of the matter, when Africa succeeds with us as bilateral partners, we will see more success.
That is worth applauding. And probably my last question, and perhaps on a more personal note, you are really considered, we highly respect, appreciate you as an extraordinary leader, whether youth, women, and people of color. So what advice will you give to people, to the young generation, to girls, to women, to people of color, to follow your footsteps, who are interested in following your footsteps?
Be bold and courageous. Be bold and courageous, because when you step into the room, you are giving life to a different voice. When you give life to a different voice, there was somebody before you who was in that space who was intimidated that you might take their role. And so despite their intimidation, be bold and courageous and incorporate everybody. There's room for every single person. So that's what I would really tell, because a lot of times I see a lot of people who, you know, have immigrant backgrounds come to the United States, and we want to work hard and prove your merit, which is everybody should, but there's a part of us that is doing to say that I deserve to be here. I deserve to be in America. My parents would say, I didn't come to this country for you to embarrass me. So we work so hard, and we forget about the boldness and the courage to say, I can change this system. So be bold and courageous, know there's room for everybody, and intentionally incorporate everyone.
What a beautiful way to conclude. Congresswoman, we are deeply grateful for you joining us today despite the incredibly hectic schedule to share your words of wisdom. So now let's take a group picture, and I will call the leadership, Dr. Brahima Coulibaly, but also Professor Pierre Gimke. And you are Deputy Chief of Staff, Angel Kwemo? No? No? Okay. And I will also call the distinguished author of the panel, Dr. Vera Songwe, Dr. Ede Vasquez, and also the representative of the African Union, Chargé d'Affaires Tarek Ben Youssef. And you can come on this side.
Thank you.
Yeah, please join us, please. Both of you. Absolutely. So we want the...
Some of these things are not like the others.
we call for collaboration and partnership. So, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. We will resume in about a minute, just a time to add an additional chair. So thank you again so much for your patience. Now, please, let me welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Vasquez, please, Ede Vasquez, and Dr. Vera Songwe. So, Vera Songwe is a non-resident fellow at the Africa Growth Initiative at the Brookings Institution and the founder and chair of the Board of Liquidity and Sustainability Facility. Amongst her many engagements, we don't introduce her anymore. She has worked with the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, of course part of the World Bank Group, but also for UNECA among many other engagements. So please give a very warm welcome to Vera Songwe. Ede Vasquez is a non-resident fellow also here at the Africa Growth Initiative, and he previously spent a couple of decades with the bank where he oversaw a portfolio of more than 80 billion in investment and close to 800 policy reports on infrastructure and sustainable development. Please give him a very warm welcome. So we will be discussing today leveraging U.S. Africa critical mineral opportunities, strategies for success. So a report co-authored with Vera Songwe and Ede Vasquez. So we are incredibly grateful to have you, the beautiful and very dynamic audience. And please prepare your questions. I will want this as interactive as possible, and will give you the time to engage with the audience. So there has been a lot of talk about critical minerals in the media, most notably with the Trump administration deals with Ukraine in April and with the Democratic Republic of Congo in June. And why are these minerals so important, and why has there been so much renewed attention, Vera?
No, first of all, thank you. Thanks to the audience for coming. An amazing, I think, conversation with the Congress lady, very well steered. It is an important conversation, and it's very good to see all of you in the room today. I think the issue of critical minerals is, again, and first and foremost, an issue of growth. And growth is the biggest challenge that we're all facing, whether be it advanced economies or emerging market economies. Of course, for emerging market economies, it's an even more important conversation. But when you look at the top 10 largest market capitalization firms in the U.S. stock exchange today, they are all dealing with critical minerals. Either they're using them, either they need them. And so essentially it has become the engine of how we get into the fourth industrial revolution, how we change our way of life and how we improve. For Africa, it is important because of the 50 critical minerals that exist and are defined by the United States. Africa has at least 28 of them. The United States does not have 50% of the critical minerals it needs. And so essentially, when we talk about growth, we talk about markets, we talk about trade. And so the conversation then invariably has to end up with what can the United States and Africa trade on to provide jobs for the Africans to begin with and to provide growth for both economies. So I think this is really the basis of that conversation. It's about growth, it's about jobs, and it's about prosperity.
Fabulous, Vera. And Ede, what are Africa's specific advantages as supplier of critical minerals?
Thank you, Landry, and great to see you all in the process, and fantastic to be with you, Vera, and Landry here. Look, when you read out there, what is Africa's advantage on critical minerals, the common answer is that, well, Africa has a lot. But what we argue in the report is that actually even rare earths are not that rare. Actually, they're all over the place, and critical minerals has become a very competitive global landscape. And therefore, just coming and saying Africa has a lot of critical minerals is not enough. Okay? Africa actually has many other advantages that we put in the report that actually the continent can really potentiate in ways that we believe will make Africa a market leader on critical minerals. When I come from Colombia, and when I compare to Latin America, there is another leader on that, or to Southeast Asia, that is also in that competition on critical minerals. Africa actually has a more clear regional political will and regional vision of where does it want to go with critical minerals. You go to Latin America, everybody's going on their own. Indonesia, in Southeast Asia, and all that, they're all going on their own. There's a clear statement of this is where the region wants to go. Second, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement allows, therefore, to have a comparative advantage on processing of those critical minerals because they are distributed in different countries. So leveraging that tremendous platform that the continent has to really move upstream in the value chain is a unique opportunity that Africa has that you don't see in other regions as clearly. Third, Africa doesn't necessarily have a very cumbersome set of regulations and history and institutions that other regions have. Where you go to Latin America or to Asia, their systems, the institutional systems are already there, and therefore they are slower. Africa has a unique opportunity to leverage the fact that these are new sectors, that there's great potential to move faster, because the name of the game, the name of the competition today on critical minerals is speed. When mines are taking 18 years from concept to production, a region, a country that is able to move from 18 to 12 to 10, which we believe is feasible, will win the race. And finally, the fact that there are more investment opportunities in Africa than in other regions, particularly if you look at transportation infrastructure, energy that is needed for the mines, and the opportunity to develop corridors from mines to export. In many other regions, that infrastructure is there. In Africa, is there for the investment. And therefore, you are looking at much larger investment packages, much larger investment opportunities in Africa than in other regions. So people may see, look, a half full glass of half empty. We in the report say, actually, it's not only half full, it's more than half full if African countries are able to get their act together. And it's not difficult. We believe that the opportunity is there.
Fabulous. African countries are no strangers to natural resource extraction and have often had a complicated relationship with these industries. How can the current critical minerals boom be leveraged in a way that generates sustainable growth for African economies, Vera?
Now, I think three things. The first one is as Eddie said, and yes, it's a pleasure to be on the stage, but more importantly, it was a pleasure to write the report because one learns a lot more, and I encourage you all to read it because there's a lot of data in it that is quite useful. But what can we do and how can we do more? The first one, of course, is policy, as Eddie said, is having clarity in policy. Now we have the African Mining Vision that has, set and laid out the framework. We have Professor Tarek here from the African Union. That is the first thing that needs to be done. The second thing, I think, is just encouraging and improving, getting better transparency in the business environment. It is one thing to have the minerals. It's yet another thing to be able to attract the investment that can come in and actually then convert those minerals into a reliable investment. Because there is demand, people are looking to come. But as Eddie said, Africa is not the only destination. And so if you look at the news every day, Total Energies or Shell or Rio Tinto is signing a new contract or finding a new discovery. And each time one discovery is found, for me, the worry is always, oh my God, which African mine is going to close down or is not going to keep working because they found something better someplace else, right? And so this is the constant tension. It's not because you finally signed the deal that you have it or that it's going to happen. I think we all know about, Simandu, we can all talk about it, which sat for a very long time, not developed because the business environment was not good enough. And so that's really the critical part of it. The third thing that we need is the financing, of course. Financing of mines is an expensive process. I think we talk about the whole idea of looking for its initial upfront huge capex expenditures. And so one wants to know that when one is doing that, one sees a future. There is on the African continent a need to renegotiate, to look at our contracts, to make sure that when you do the contracts, if you're doing them for anew, initially we always had contracts that said, when you start producing, we will get royalties and we will get some taxes. Today, you need profit-sharing agreements, which means as soon as you start taking minerals off the ground, the country should get a share of that part of the minerals. And this is becoming a little bit more, if you look at, I think, over 23 countries have rebalanced their mining negotiations, as they call it, so the rebalancing of the negotiations to do this. Because as Eddie said, it takes 19 years to develop. And the companies will not do this or would not start providing resources to you for 19 years if you go with the concept that says we wait until you start. And so I think the last thing that we need to do better is work even more effectively on contract mining. And we don't say this in the report, but I was thinking the other day when the Congresswoman talked about New York, the big conversation in New York was around countries that have mines and all. We don't have one or two big legal law mining companies on the continent where if somebody says, where do I get advice? You say, go to that, right? Everybody will name 2 or 3 foreign legal firms, and I won't name them here. But I think we need to build that human capacity, not only for the technology of the mines, but also for the service provision that we're doing, which we have not yet done.
Fantastic, Vera. Eddie, so many players are involved in the critical mineral sphere in Africa. How is the United States compared to other countries?
Well, I'll be blunt. The U.S. is late, really late. You're having European companies, you have Australian companies, you have the Chinese, of course, that have been there in the market for many, many years in that process. Actually, even India and Saudi Arabia are moving very fast into the continent because the race for critical minerals is on. Very highly, clearly described. It is linked to so much of the economy, not only, and therefore it's important not only for the economic growth, but for the national security of countries around the world, and therefore everybody's positioning. So I was in the World Bank office in Beijing for 4 years, and that was in 2008, and there you would see the Chinese government already thinking, look, clean energy is going to be critical for our national energy security. Okay? It's going to be critical for our market, and therefore we need to start figuring out how to do the critical minerals and have a strong supply chains in that process. And that was a process of 15 years. And it was not only on the mining, it was on the also processing in China, and it was all the infrastructure that goes around that process and getting all of those deals to make sure that the deals are done. Now, is it done? No, the demand is growing. The U.S. needs to diversify its supply chains, and therefore the opportunities for these combined investment packages are out there. And therefore, as the Congresswoman was saying, this is not just a business-to-business relationship. It requires a very structured and active diplomacy that looks at that as a single package. And second, it's important to look at this is not just a deal on mining, okay? If you just look at mining deals, then you're not going to have the infrastructure in place to take out the minerals, the energy in place to produce the mines. You're not going to have the package to start on day one ready to go. If you're only focusing from the U.S. just on the mining side, then it's not going to work in that process. Now, and that requires a lot of coordinated engagement. I'll close with one point, which is in many of these initiatives, the tradition has been the government leading alone, and that doesn't work. Unless you have the private sector, both from the infrastructure, asset management, and from the mining side, and not only that, actually, remember that these corridors provide a unique opportunity to develop the special economic zones that with the right approaches on trade can be unique opportunities for American companies to produce in Africa. And therefore, it is the private sector from these different perspectives that need to be center of this initiative, because it's only the private sector that is going to say, yes, government of the U.S., and you have many actors in that process. You think that this is what we need. The reality is that we need 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yes, financing is mentioned, but it's not necessarily said the financing is really the guarantees, or is the protection, or is the currency swaps. It is different things that the private sector may be needing. That centrality of the role of the American private sector needs to be part of that very coordinated initiative moving forward.
Fabulous, Eddie. And we know that for successful and for thriving critical minerals industry on the continent, the involvement of numerous players, important whether government, private sector, Congress, among others. Vera, who are the key players in Africa?
I mean, the first one is, of course, the government, because when you start with the investment, you need the land lease, you need the policy framework. I think it's also important to think about the private sector, the local private sector. In many countries today, what we have is beneficiation, local content regulation, which encourages and continues to grow the local private sector. I think where we have seen enormous success in the local private sector in developing economy is in Nigeria, where essentially the whole sort of backward provision, yes, it's not clean energy, but in the whole sort of maintenance of the oil business in Nigeria, it is Nigerians who manage it. It will be important to build that capacity across the continent for all the other sectors. There is, I think, a very important component around mining, which is, of course, gender. And a lot of the women who, when we start talking about local content, they provide the small and medium enterprise businesses that support the mines. And there, again, is an important component that we need to look at. The multilateral development institutions, the financing institutions, both on the continent but abroad, the Exim banks of the world, the U.S. Exim Bank is an important element. Afri-Exim Bank is an important one because they allow for that trade negotiations and to buy down the cost of the investments in those countries. So I think you have policy and the governments, of course, both the importing and the exporting governments. You have the private sector in the home countries. You have, I think one of the biggest successes of the Lobito Corridor, if we take a clear example, is really the ability to have been able to bring together U.S. private sector, U.S. development agencies, the DFC, for example, the African Development Bank, the African Finance Corporation, Africa 50, that whole sort of short-term capital, long-term capital, patient capital, to say, how do we make sure that we do this kind of policy? The African Union, most importantly, because of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, allows when people come in to do the mineral business, they're not looking exactly as Eddie said, they're looking to do businesses that are transboundary on the continent. If you're investing in Sierra Leone, you're probably going to have to, if you're investing in Guinea today, the discussion is about taking it either through Liberia or through Chad, building that railway. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which is the platform, the African Continental Platform for Growth, really provides, I think, the basis for how that should work. And so we start with, I think, the regional organizations also as an important player, even though it is regional and or national mining, there is always this continental component to it.
Continuing with you, Vera, looking to the near to medium term, what are some concrete steps that can be taken by African governments that will position their country to benefit from the race for critical minerals?
Four. The first one, I think, and I'm a believer in the doing business, I always say this, and in the doing business, we always used to talk about one-stop shop. Because we have, as you have just heard from Ede and myself, the mineral development requires all kinds of permits, from the land permit to the phytosanitary permit to the environmental permit. An investor cannot do all of this and run around different agencies. So having a one-stop shop for sort of the mining sector. And I'm very happy to say that a couple of African countries have already started doing this, but this is really critical to sort of shorten that discovery process. I think the second one is the policy environment, stability again in the policy environment. There is, as Ede said, on the continent we have the fortune or the misfortune of having sort of semi-open mines. It takes 16 years to actually sort of open a mine and bring it to full production. We have semi-open mines on the continent, I think, working to attract more investment into those mines because they've sort of started production, but they haven't sort of reached full capacity, is a very important point. And I think we can benefit a little bit more from crowding in investors into that segment of the industry. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement I just talked about is, again, a way of making sure that we can, say, for example, have regional schools that produce experts that can help support production of the mines. We can have regional licenses so that if you have a license in one of the countries, maybe you can do work in the sub-region. It speeds up and it makes sure. When we talk about beneficiation, a lot of times, if you're in DRC, maybe you need some of the manganese in Gabon, and you need some of the platinum in South Africa so that the guy who is in Morocco can produce the car. This is what we're talking about, is Africa working within and amongst itself. We know that when Africa adds value to the goods that it produces, then its exports are of much higher quality. So that is the African Free Trade Area Agreement. I keep coming back to that, but it is really the underpinning of how we add value, how we add it better, how we work regionally to trade even better so that whenever we export, so it's not because we want to just trade with ourselves, it's because we want to add value to whatever we trade on with the rest of the world. And I think that is really the final most important thing that we have to do, is continue to operationalize the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement.
Fantastic, Vera. Same question, Eddie, but focusing on the U.S. What are the things that the U.S. government, whether we are speaking about the White House, Congress, specific agencies, can do in the near to medium term to ensure successful engagement with Africa on critical minerals?
Thank you, Landry. I think, and I already hinted at some of those. First, the report comes and says, look, don't work alone. If you are just looking at the government agencies in that process, and Congress and the White House and the State Department, then it becomes very narrow and you are losing opportunities. You are leaving opportunities on the table. Okay? Therefore, bringing the private sector as a key partner into that discussions becomes critical. Second, because of the transitions that are happening on the institutions that can provide financing, and there's all that transition, then take a fresh look of what can be done. What can be done with Exim Bank, what can be done revitalizing the DFC, but also look at the international financial institutions that help, for example, in the Lobito corridor. So the African Development Bank, the African Finance Corporation, the World Bank, use them in that process. Really bring them to the table. Don't let them just go into a slow process. Again, speed is of the essence. The final point is really coordination. Before that, actually, one of the things that is really surprising in Africa is that, look, lots of critical minerals out there, but actually the level of exploration is very low when you compare to other regions with critical minerals. And therefore, the potential to get serious about investing and figuring out because it's not only to find where are the critical minerals, but to understand their potential for exploitation, the way in which you could actually look at rare earths as a part of the processing that you have, the potential for really do a lot of the post-processing in the mining close to it. All of that, there's a lot more information that needs to be done, and therefore the government of the U.S. has a unique opportunity to partner with Africa to advance the knowledge that then can be used to lower the risk for the investments to come after in that process. So, and then I think that all that coordination sounds easy, but it's not easy. Okay? And therefore, we see a lot of the conversation just happening on the mining side, and we believe that that's not going to be as effective as if you don't take a more comprehensive view so that all of the pieces of the puzzle come together at the same time to make it happen. The Lobito corridor was, and we analyzed it in the report, was a great experience, but we tend to think that it's a little bit too slow. I think that it didn't potentiate the investments from some of the American companies on infrastructure and energy. It didn't potentiate the really economic development along the corridor yet. It's going to happen. It always happens, but the question is, are you going to wait for 20, 25 years for it all to move? Or are you really making sure that that generation of entrepreneurs is not lost, but it actually can be potentiated if you have the infrastructure, the energy, the opportunities to really move into tradables in Africa for export? It's those combinations that actually make the difference, and I think that that's where the leadership of the U.S. as a partner that comes with all these pieces will actually make it the most interesting partner for African countries today.
Fantastic. Let me now turn to questions, the Q&A session. So, have you prepared your questions? I want your reaction. Have you prepared your questions? Amazing. So, yes, get started here. The mic is coming your way. Introduce yourself. Be brief. Just ask your question. If not, I will interrupt you.
Hi, I'm Lucas. I'm a student at AU. My question is, what role does on-site renewable energy, specifically solar and battery storage, have to play in powering these mineral resources, and how can American development firms like NextEra get involved and work with these mining firms?
Fantastic. And I will take 3 questions. So I will take the other one there, and then I'll come to you.
Hi, my name is Max. I'm a student at GW. I'm wondering about concrete financing tools to de-risk the investment. It was briefly touched upon, but I'm wondering what concrete tools can be used. Is it equity injections into private companies that go there? Is it floor prices? For example, if you build a smelter that sort of de-risks the offtake a bit. I mean, there's a lot of things happening with the MP deal in the US, but what have you been discussing so far?
Fantastic. And the final one, we'll have another round right after this, so please prepare your next questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Ojo Rumi Okoka. I'm here with my fellow student, Amaya. In the earlier conversation with Congresswoman McCormick, she mentioned that when Africans discuss modern trade aid policy, that they don't believe in just getting a blank check. They more believe in bringing industries to Africa from businesses in the West to Africa in order to reindustrialize their own nation. But I feel as if that's almost antithetical with the current Trump administration policy with reindustrializing America. How can both of those two positions be synthesized to get the best possible outcome? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vera, you can get started.
Sorry. Let me take maybe the question on investments to start with. I think there's a number of ways of de-risking. The first one is, of course, the government itself being able to do some of the initial investments, right? As we know, in a lot of the investments, the biggest risk are when you start in the brownfield. And so essentially, if one were able to work a little bit more to go from greenfield to brownfield, it's easier. The second thing, of course, is energy. Energy is, and that links a little bit to your question, energy is probably one of the largest impediments to mineral exploration on the continent. If you want to start a mine, you need to bring in some kind of energy facility beside you. What we are looking at and what we think is, yes, I think, thank God for some of the research in the United States, and battery energy storage became really a reliable source of energy. I think there's been a lot of conversation around solar. Solar cannot power a mine, let's be clear. You need real baseload, sustainable energy to power a mine. But I think being able to move from maybe transporting the solar into battery energy storage begins to give you the kind of capacity, right? We don't yet know how to do more than 5 megawatts of it, so you need to do a little bit more to do that. Otherwise, of course, there's hydro on the continent, which can be used. So I think there's a little bit of that. There are guarantees, of course, and a lot of guarantees are being, I think that's one of the sort of critical areas where DFC can be crowded in, where you get a guarantee, but it's easier to get a guarantee if you have an off-taker. So if you're doing critical minerals for off-take into the U.S. security infrastructure, then having a very clear off-taker makes it even easier to provide a guarantee, because it is a U.S. off-taker, it's a U.S. Business that is going to buy that. And as you said, some equity, we on the continent believe that equity is almost the first best, right? Because the minute you bring in equity means you have skin in the game. You're bringing knowledge, you're bringing technology transfer, you're bringing a lot more into the deal. So there is also a move on the continent to say, let's bring in and let's have more equity stake and more equity participation in the mining deals, because it helps us, you know, when we start talking about beneficiation and value addition in those processes. So I think it's a stack, right, of some concessional money from the World Bank and other development agencies for that initial exploration stage, which is expensive, costly, and nobody knows what you can find. Some domestic resource mobilization. But as one begins to say, you know, there is a real investable case, then you can begin to bring in more market capital, first loss, and maybe sort of, you know, different subordinations into the concept.
Fantastic, Vera. And Ede?
Sure, I'll pick up Vera. You basically answered and had all my points, so well done. Let me add on the guarantee side. One has to recognize that the global critical minerals industry is subject to a lot of manipulation in the prices, where you have such concentration both on the production but also on the refining. Then that risk, and that has been seen by many actors, to begin to lower the price to crush the competition. And therefore, as you were mentioning, different mechanisms of floor price or secure purchase and all that process, we believe that are very needed. And given the national security and industrial security for the US, it does make sense to make that as part of a complementary package, that then some of the guarantees from MIGA or from the African Development Bank that can cover some of the political risk, then you have a really interesting package that reduces the risk in that process. But it's super important not to be naive that this is a market that is subject to substantial manipulation in that process. In terms of the renewable energy, I think one has to unpack. Given the tremendous potential for renewable energy and on hydro in the continent, I think that allows for much greener mining sector in Africa that compared to Asia. Latin America has also that advantage if you look at it from that perspective. But there's a lot of complementary areas that can be done with other renewable energies, all the way from the special economic zones and industrial parks that can become viable just because you have those regional economic corridors, to the opportunities for the SMEs and for the entire urban development that generally happens around that process. So the opportunities are there, and therefore it's not, again, the message is that if you just too narrow on just looking at the mine, you are missing the opportunities to accelerate that process. And then the contradiction between the industrialization in Africa and the industrialization in the US, one has to recognize that Africa has cost advantages in many of industries that are related to mining that the US are not going to compete, and vice versa. There are segments of the value chain where the US has all the way from IP to the know-how to the industrial infrastructure that actually begins to allow a differentiation between the US and Africa in a way that everybody wins. And therefore, just getting the minerals and do processing in the US fully is just not economically viable. You have tremendous opportunities in Africa to move in a segment of the value chain, and then so that there's also industrialization in the US for the rest of the value chain. It comes together in that process. So I think that there are very practical ways for everybody to win and to really industrialize in both ways in complementary segments of that value chain.
Fantastic, Eddie. And now let's move to the last round of questions. We'll start here with the chief.
Good morning and thanks for coming. I'm Chief Bajombi, editor from Cameroon. My question is simple. Your organization is really wonderful. Is there any way African being so broad for you to make them know how easy it is to go to certain parts of Africa so they will not be shopping all around? Take, for instance, Cameroon, where I come from. That speaks for itself. You see, you are right there from Cameroon. My daughter's Miss Songwe is there from Cameroon. Cameroon being the most stable country in Africa and having almost everything, which is Africa in miniature, with the traditional rulers, which are the chiefs, which reign forever, who are the auxiliary of the administration, who will always be there so you will not get duped, who will give you soft landing, who will also give you almost everything that you have to start with. So can you make it easy for partners and investors to be able to land easily in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. Yes, ma'am here. So we'll take those three questions, 1, 2, 3, and those will be the final one before coming to the panel.
Good morning. My name is Regina Chebi. So I have one question related to the African free trade continental area. So you mentioned that we should move to a more operationalization of the AFTA. But we know that the critical mineral sectors in Africa is very fragmented because of different rules of origin. And my question is, how can we have a clear timeline of the reforms that government should implement to do, like what government should do in the short, medium, and the long term? Thank you.
Fantastic. We'll have another question on the back, and then we'll come to the front for the last one.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's afternoon around. I think it's still morning. My name is Yokai Chweshe. I'm a program officer at the National Endowment in the Africa program. And my question is, we're seeing kind of the official foreign development assistance sector is kind of system is actually at an inflection point. So we're seeing like severe decline in development financing, and the financing models, I think everyone agrees at this point in time, does not seem to be working. So how do we reimagine and rethink the development financing model, especially given that we've got limited resources? Where does the critical mineral sector kind of focus their investments, but also how should we also leverage South-South cooperation? And then lastly, I would say that, critical mining sector has also contributed severe harms as well. We're looking at forced displacements, we're looking at environmental degradation. How do we gain equity from locals and buy in and minimize those harms?
Amazing. And the last question, and that question that you just asked is similar to the one that one of our online, which was submitted online by Abu Bakar. So I will not restate that question. So last question.
Hi, my name is Deborah. I am an AU student, and my question pertains to BRICS. So BRICS is an institution that couples with Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa, and they've essentially had their place with the minerals sector and investment. And as you mentioned before, America's a bit late. So I guess how can we present a case that transparency is a good thing and won't slow down the process, as you mentioned, because it can take 15 years?
Wow, those are incredibly wonderful questions. We can take the entire day to answer each of them, but I will ask the distinguished panelists to stick to about 1.5 minutes in answering those, but they will be available right when we close, so we can continue to engage. This is just a start. So, Ede, do you want to start?
After you.
I started first the last time. A full question, I think. I think on the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, you must give credit to the African governments. There has been a lot of work that's been done. The rules of origins have been agreed, and I think that work is progressing. My sense is there is still one or two commodities where there is a conversation, and one of them is the automobile industry. But so I think what we now need to do is more the real implementation and bringing and crowding in the private sector. I think on the question around what does Africa need to do and the mineral vision, we already have the African mineral vision, as I said. I think what we now need to do is countries' parliaments need to adopt it so that one can begin to move towards real coordinated and collective production processes. But we already see DRC and Zambia are sharing a boundary, are beginning to do work together. The Lobito corridor is pushing that. I think the Beira corridor, again. So when we talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and the fact that Africa is not working together, there are already, I think we have the Africa Power Pools, West Africa Power Pool, East Africa Power Pool. There are a number of things that are already happening and happening quite positively. What we need to do is build on them. Implementation sometimes is a little bit difficult. And I think on the issue of transparency, what we are trying to do now is clearly, and let's be clear, when we talk about transparency, it takes two to tango. And I think there's a lot of work that's going on in the IMF now to work a little bit more on seeing whether we can begin to publish data. The World Bank has already done the open data process. We're hoping that all the multilateral development banks as well contribute to this transparency process by providing more data on debt agreements, when they were contracted, and a little bit more detail. Today, we don't have that. We have the countryside that is still weak, but we also need the private sector and the creditors to be able to put that data out in a more sustainable way.
So, Eddie, I'm sorry.
30 seconds on environment.
If you can just...
30 seconds on environment, and actually it's a fundamental part of the process, and I think a comparative advantage of the U.S. Africa shouldn't be taking mines that are actually polluting the way that they are polluting today. I think that that's an important non-negotiable into that process, and the incorporation of the informal miners that are so critical in many of the countries, which we don't review in the report just because there was not enough time for us to get into a really complex issue, but I think that that needs to be an integral part of the process. 30 seconds.
What a beautiful way to conclude. Please give a very warm welcome. A man of the time. So let me now call Chargé d'Affaires Tarek Ben Youssef to the podium. He's a distinguished career diplomat from Tunisia with the rank of Minister Plenipotentiary or class, with more than 3 decades of engagement in diplomacy worldwide, and a Harvard graduate, a Thunderbird graduate, and a dear friend of us here. So thank you so much, Tarek, for joining us to represent the African Union and to share the words of conclusion.
Thank you, Professor Signé, and very good morning to each one of you. Dr. Brahima Coulibaly, Vice President of the Global Economy and Development at the Brookings, Professor Pierre Ngwigme, the Director of the Africa Growth Initiative, Professor Landry Signé, I have another title for you, the dearest friend of the African Union and the African Diplomatic Corps in Washington, Dr. Vera Songwe, non-resident fellow and the former Under-Secretary of UNICA, Dr. Eddie Vasquez, distinguished participant. Allow me to extend my deep appreciations to the Brookings for convening this timely and insightful conference on leveraging U.S. critical mineral opportunities, strategies for success. I'm pleased with the kind invitation extended to me to be part of this event and to share a few remarks. In this regard, I want to acknowledge the leadership of the Africa Growth Initiative and its active commitment to advancing U.S.-Africa relations and elevating the opportunity of partnership between the two sides. I'm also grateful to our esteemed speaker, the Honorable Congresswoman Sheila Sherfers McCormack, and our distinguished panelists, the authors of the report that was launched today. Thank you, Dr. Songwe, Dr. Vankes, and Professor Signé, for the valuable contribution you have made to this important research agenda of increasing salience in U.S.-Africa relations. U.S. investment in critical minerals in Africa are placed high on the agenda of the African Union Commission and the 35 member states having critical mineral resources, as indicated in the report, as a new opportunity of mutual beneficial partnership. As has been highlighted in the various interventions this morning, critical minerals present a unique opportunity for the continent to harness its mineral wealth into economic development and to transition from a raw material exporter to a global value chain player. There is no silver bullet regarding the best policy approaches to maximize the developmental benefits of critical mineral and for the continent to become a value maker. However, to harness the full potential of the critical mineral, and I would like to echo many ideas presented by Dr. Songwe. However, to harness this full potential, we need to operate a strategic paradigm shift toward a more deliberate collective regional approaches. Single country plans, as you have mentioned in your recent article, are suboptimal and insufficient for the development of critical mineral value chains. Regional collective action can lead to optimal results in addressing the continent's most pressing challenges, including the infrastructure gaps estimated at $108 billion annually. Within this spirit, the African Union Commission has deepened and expanded its partnership with the United States. I can tell you today that there is a strong momentum to work on a regional basis to address shared transboundary challenges of peace and security, but also to leverage strategically the trade and investment opportunity that the continent offers. The best recent example that reflects the value of our collaboration regionally with the United States is the implementation of the Washington Peace Agreement between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda and its regional economic integration framework. This framework outlines a shared vision for strengthening economic interdependence to promote lasting peace and prosperity. The African Union Commission is actively engaged in this process in its capacity as a member of the Joint Oversight Committee of the Peace Agreement. Beyond the new model of partnership that has regional dimension, and as a convener, coordinator of the African collective action and approach, the African Union mission here in the United States is actively engaging in mobilizing greater U.S. investment across multiple sector, but also, as you mentioned, transboundary. And think that this is where the huge potential that we need tap. The upcoming Luanda Financing Summit for Infrastructure Development in Angola from the 28th of October to the 31st of October is an excellent opportunity to take U.S. Africa relationship to another level. This is an eloquent example that on the nexus between critical minerals on the one hand and Africa and infrastructure development. Another promising area that has been mentioned of cooperation with the United States is in science and technology, which is critical to critical minerals. There is an urgent need to create in Africa the workforce in areas of critical mineral industry. What you mentioned, Dr. Sangui, the human capacity dimension. And so this is an urgent issue and technology and skills development for value addition to ensure a deeper participation in this value chain. The African Union Commission signed last year, in fact, a memorandum of cooperation with the University of Utah to enhance mineral sector innovation and sustainable development through partnership. This is an area that we intend to pursue actively with other universities. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, the continent stands at a pivotal juncture in its development journey, offering immense opportunities for economic transformation. Innovative approaches and deliberate policies would allow the continent to act more collectively to provide the needed public goods. I believe these are public goods that are non-excludable in terms of their exploitation, and the investments and the paradigm should shift toward the provision of these goods at a time when regionalism has become more vital in responding to emerging global challenges. Today's conference made a valuable contribution in identifying promising pathways and strategies for success in one of the key sectors that would allow Africa to become a global hub for critical minerals processing. And I want to reiterate to you, Professor, to you, my dear friend, and to the distinguished authors, my sincere thanks for the Brookings Institution for its leadership. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Chargé d'Affaires Tarek Ben Youssef. It's incredibly amazing. So I just want to again express my deep gratitude to AGI Director, Professor Gimker, for his extraordinary leadership. But also to our incredibly wonderful Global Comms teams, to our incredibly wonderful Brookings Central Comms teams, to the Central teams also in the security, they are always there. We often forget them, but thank you so much for keeping us safe. So I also want to emphasize the people who work behind the scenes, such as global development, among others, and our administrative support. So please give them a very warm round of applause. Last but not least, we are so grateful to have you coming on a Tuesday morning to celebrate U.S. Africa relations. So thank you so much for joining us. The session is closed.